Good morning. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce Angela Lunde. I worked with Angela many years ago at Olmsted Medical Center. Angela is a dementia educator at Mayo Clinic. So please welcome Angela Lunde.
Thank you, Harlan. Are you hearing me okay?
Yeah.
Good. So it's great when you haven't seen somebody for, Harlan and I were saying, about 15 years, but you can still sort of look them up and ask them to come and do you a favor. So I absolutely love that. I love the opportunity to come and speak with you, not only because this is something that I am extraordinarily passionate about. It's been my livelihood, my work for the last 15 years, but also because this is my community. I was born in Rochester and have not changed my zip code. And I'm thinking one of the things I want to do as I look forward to transitioning into the next chapter of my life after work is my #1 goal is to change my zip code. But for now, there's a lot of good reasons for me just to stay right here and to do what I'm doing. So I'm going to talk with you today about dementia. I loved listening to the sermon this morning and being a part of that and hearing how people react to this world of dementia, because that truly is what it is right now. And I come to talk with you more about how we can create a community of inclusiveness and understanding. And as the first slide says, to the world you may be one person, but to one person you may be the world. And dementia certainly invites us all to think about community. And even though my primary work actually is in the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, or so I'm working, next to the top scientists in the world, figuring out how to cure this disease, how to treat this disease. It's not really what I'm all that interested in. I'm really more interested in about how do we create community and live with this disease. So in addition to working in the research center, I also work in the Department of Psychology and Psychiatry at Mayo Clinic and developed a program with my colleagues in the Department of Cognitive Disorders called HABIT. HABIT stands for Healthy Actions to Benefit Independence and Thinking, and it really focuses on the belief, and my belief, that individuals with dementia can still learn, they can still continue to thrive, and there are many more things that people with dementia can do than they can't. But we have a society right now that once we even hear the word dementia, we start to think about disabilities, we start to assume what an individual can no longer do. We have millions of neurons in our brain, and even with dementia, many still exist. So focus is on helping individuals, helping communities and societies shift from thinking about what persons with dementia can no longer do, and really recognizing the capabilities and abilities that persons with dementia have. And that's where hope lies, and that's where I get excited about this work. I also recently took on a little bit of a project with Charterhouse, and in the Cognitive Health and Wellness Director there, and will be for the next couple of years. And aging communities are continuing to be an important and vital part of the larger community at whole. And Charterhouse is probably no different than a lot of other aging communities around the country where the average age is growing. The average age at Charterhouse right now is about 85 years old, which means that every other individual probably has some level of cognitive impairment. And I'm not a proponent, for the most part, of building more and more memory units in places and spaces to house individuals who are living with dementia. I'm much more a proponent of creating a dementia-friendly community where people with dementia can live and thrive amongst all of us, working to decrease isolation and to decrease stigma. And with that, I want to talk with you about the church community, your faith community, and some thoughts I have that might be helpful to you. So I'm just going to talk 2 slides to get us sort of on the same page with dementia. Dementia is a general term for a decline in mental ability, severe enough to begin to interfere with daily life. Dementia itself is not a diagnosis. It's really a set of symptoms. So you or a family member may go to see your healthcare provider because you're experiencing more forgetfulness maybe than you think is normal. Maybe there's been some changes in one's ability to reason and to judge in a way that we think is appropriate for that individual. They may be making some decisions that we just don't think are in line with who they are and what their values traditionally have been. Maybe there's some difficulty word finding or getting lost. Those are dementia symptoms. And so the job of the healthcare provider is to figure out what's causing those symptoms. And the number one cause of a progressive dementia over the age of 65 is Alzheimer's disease. But it's not the only cause of dementia. Alzheimer's disease is one, and the main symptom of Alzheimer's disease, or the hallmark feature, is memory-based syndrome. So most individuals who come and are eventually diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease probably first and foremost are complaining about forgetfulness. But not forgetting everything. Individuals with Alzheimer's disease may be able to beautifully speak about some event that happened decades ago that has a lot of meaning to them, but they might not be able to tell you what they had for breakfast this morning. That is memory. That's similar to what you might experience with Alzheimer's disease. Second most common cause of a primary dementia, we used to think it was pretty rare, but now we're learning it really isn't because we're getting more sophisticated in diagnosing, and that's Lewy body dementia. And Lewy body dementia, like Alzheimer's disease, is a progressive dementia. It's not better or worse than Alzheimer's disease, but it looks and smells a little bit different. Folks with Lewy body dementia may have some memory loss, although it might not be as prominent early on. The hallmark features of Lewy body dementia, however, are more hallucinations, Parkinsonism features oftentimes either early in the disease or later on in the disease. And in the last decade, we've really recognized that these are individuals who have a profound sleep disorder. REM behavior sleep disorder is oftentimes associated with this disease. There are also individuals who have extreme fluctuations between confusion and lucidity. And this can make it pretty insidious for family members because literally this individual may be talking in a way that it's extremely lucid and totally in line and saying things that really give us a sense that this person's doesn't have any problems. And then literally 10 minutes later, there's profound confusion. And family members begin to get really frustrated and thinking, well, here's an individual who was just doing something 10 minutes ago and now they're struggling doing it. They must not be trying hard enough. They're trying just to be difficult. And the reality of it is that's truly what Lewy body dementia looks like. A lot of significant fluctuations from day to day. This disease is becoming much more well known. In fact, Mayo Clinic, myself and my colleagues are now hosting the first International Lewy Body Dementia Conference that's going to be taking place this year in December. And the third, much less common, but we're learning more about it, and it's important to know about it. It's called frontotemporal dementia, and that's a broad term for a subgroup of dementias that really impact the frontal lobes of the brain, so right up here. And it's the front part of the brain that really is responsible for our personality. So while Alzheimer's disease begins to take memory away from folks, Lewy body dementia seems to impact individuals' emotions. So these are individuals who can't necessarily regulate emotion very well. They don't have that filter that you and I normally have in our day-to-day life and interactions with individuals. My uncle was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia. He was a physician in northern Minnesota. He died about 5 or 6 years after his diagnosis. And this was about 15, 20 years ago, way before we really understood this disease. But he was a doctor in a small town, and he would go into the small town cafes, and he would say very inappropriate things to the wait staff or the people that might be sitting next to him. If he didn't like the color of your hair or what you were wearing, or thought you were too fat or thought you were too thin, well, you and I might think that. We don't say that because we have frontal lobes that are working. Somebody with frontotemporal dementia, those lobes aren't working. And so they say what they think, and oftentimes it is a little bit uncomfortable for everybody around. But we know more about this. It's also the disease that impacts individuals younger. It's the most common cause of a progressive dementia for individuals under the age of 65. My uncle was 48 when he was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia. So, that's just a little bit of background on what we're talking about here. In general, we're talking about an aging society, and with that, the number one risk factor for Alzheimer's disease is age. By 2030, roughly 20% of the US population will be 65 years or older. And in most congregations, I think that percentage is higher. This congregation, I'm guessing that more than 20% of you are over the age of 65. And I think it's really been sort of the way that congregations do business is that they devote a large proportion of their resources to ministries involving youth and children. And while there's nothing wrong with that, the future of many congregations, I believe, may actually lie in supporting and continuing to have active memberships amongst their older members. So congregations today, I believe, are called to learn how to age together. And that's why I'm excited to come and to talk to this congregation. That's why I loved hearing the sermon this morning, because we're called to come to learn how to age together with grace, I believe, with friendship, with joy, with service, with faithful discipleship. And that's going to mean, for many of us, personally or somebody within our congregation, it's going to include the reality of dementia. Here's the startling statistics. By the age of 65, approximately 1 person in 7 is already experiencing some changes in the brain. We all experience some forgetfulness and some memory decline as we age. Memory decline as we age is normal for the most part. There's this point at which memory decline is no longer normal, but all of us have some forgetfulness, right? We forget where we parked the car. We forget, we're walking around our house. This happens to me all the time. I go downstairs, I walk into a room, and I cannot remember why it is I walked in there. We're misplacing things. So those are all, we can't remember the name of somebody that's, that we just had a conversation with, or we can't remember the name of somebody that we're having a conversation with. Has this ever happened to you? You're at the grocery store or something, and you're having this conversation, and you wish it was church and they were wearing their name tag, right? And you know this person, and you know that they go to church, and you know that they have kids, but you cannot remember their name. And then you walk out to your car, or an hour or two later, you have this aha moment, and you're like, yes, that's their name. That's normal. Our speed of processing slows as we get older. What's not normal, I hear a lot of people. What's not normal is not remembering even with enough time. So if I were to ask you in the room, tell me what you had for dinner last night, most of you are thinking, I'm not sure. Oh my gosh. But if I give you enough time, you'll remember. If you don't, it's not necessarily that there's a problem, but we might get more concerned. By the age of 72, 1 person in 3 experiences measurable cognitive loss. And by memorable, probably meaning they have some type of dementia due to Alzheimer's disease or Lewy body dementia or something similar. And at the age of 85, up to half of us will be living with some form of dementia, or we will have dementia ourselves. So about 50% of individuals over the age of 65 have dementia. So we think about dementia and we think about what it strips away and what we no longer have and that we can't carry on a conversation, but I really challenge that dementia does not take away the essence of who we are. I truly know that dementia does not take away the essence of who we are. Personhood is not defined solely by our cognition, by our memories, but rather by our relationships with others. I think it's our relationships with others and our connection to others that creates our humanness. And that's something we can do something about as individuals and as a faith community. One of the individuals, I spend a lot of time with people who have dementia. I hear a lot of profound and amazing things that has changed my life. One of the individuals I met a couple years ago said this: people didn't know how to talk to me, even though I was the same person I was 5 minutes before I told them I had it. They just saw this big A on my forehead. They didn't look at me as the same person. I was stupid. I couldn't carry on a conversation or have a single thought of my own, which was very distressing for me. I see this a lot of times, even in the medical community and even with the professionals I work with. An individual gets a label of dementia or Alzheimer's disease, and all of a sudden, we judge and we have assumptions about what this person is, what they can and cannot do. I want to talk a bit about emotion and dementia. So our emotional life comes from an inner part of our brain called the amygdala. It's where our emotions arise. And the amygdala is more instinctive than the thinking part of our cortex. It's part of our humanness. We have emotion. And persons with Alzheimer's disease maintain emotional needs. That part, that instinctive part of the brain, the amygdala, is not impacted by persons who have Alzheimer's disease. Persons who have Alzheimer's disease, though, may have a more difficult time regulating emotion. And sometimes we refer to people who have dementia as having behaviors. They're responding appropriately to the situation as they see it. And they may not be responding in a way that seems absolutely appropriate to us, because it may seem like they're acting out or they're being assertive or they're being aggressive. But when you lose your ability to communicate verbally, you have to figure out how to communicate. And persons with Alzheimer's disease compensate by making sure they know what you think or how they're feeling based sometimes on the way that they're acting. You know, I don't ever want to compare folks who have Alzheimer's disease to children, but this one time I just want to make a correlation because I think it helps clarify things. When we were children, before we were able to verbally communicate, so we were infants, toddlers, are your children and grandchildren who are that young, are they able to figure out a way to let you know when they're angry or upset or not getting their needs met? You bet. They don't have words. That's not there for them quite yet. But they communicate through their actions. Persons with Alzheimer's disease are just trying to communicate. They may not regulate it in a way that we like because the amygdala might be impacted. But they maintain just as much emotion as they did before the disease, if not even more. We've talked. You hear about human basic human needs, like we have the need we need for shelter, we have the need for food, but there's also universal emotional needs that we all have from the time we are born to the time we die. We all have the need to feel respected. We all have the need to choose, and we all have the need to feel that we are in control of our own life. If you didn't feel that you had control of your own life, and somebody else was telling you what to do, and somebody else was making decisions for you, how might you respond? You might be a little pissed off. You might be a little angry. That's the life of persons with Alzheimer's disease. When we do not feel in control, we react. We have the need to feel worthy. We have the need to feel like we matter and that our life has meaning. And for individuals of this faith community who've been coming to this congregation for a long time, this is a community who thrives on feeling like they can be of service to others. And we all have a need to give and receive love. A reciprocal give and receive. These universal needs do not change when people have dementia or Alzheimer's disease. And what I'm passionate about is that we can actually help provide and foster and cultivate these emotional needs for our persons who have Alzheimer's disease. Older people and people with dementia need help to help them feel connected, feel loved, needed, and respected. For years I did consulting in care facilities, and I'd go and I'd talk with staff and families when they asked me to come in because somebody with dementia was acting out or having behaviors. And 98% of the time, most challenges, most behaviors, if that's what you want to call them, I just call them an expression of need, but most challenges, most behaviors arise when an emotional need is threatened. So when I go in and I'm talking with staff and families, I'm kind of going down the emotional need checklist. What are we doing that might be making this person feel like they're not respected? Are we giving this individual a sense that they have some control over their life, or are we giving them a sense that they have no control? Are we creating meaningful engagement every day so they feel valued and so they feel like they can contribute and continue to contribute? And when one of those things is threatened, I expect that I'm going to see somebody who's angry or agitated or irritable. We tend to blame behaviors on the disease. It has nothing to do with the disease, really. It has to do with the day-to-day life we create or don't create for these folks. One of the things that I do is I do a lot of support groups, and I work a lot with couples who are just beginning to go down this path, where one of the two in this dyad has Alzheimer's disease or a new diagnosis. And this puts a lot of strain on couples, right? Because most of the couples that I meet with have been married for a lot of years, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. And when one or the other now begins to have some problems with memory, it begins to really disrupt things. The ways in which they communicated for decades that seemed to work for them, better or for worse, but it worked, got the job done, are not working so well when dementia begins to come in. And there's irritability, and there's anger, and there's blaming. And I was talking with a woman once in one of the support groups that I facilitate, and the two questions that I ask most often that I think really foster and get at the heart of what we can accomplish are this: what do you worry about and what do you hope for? Amazing questions to ask people if you really want to begin to understand how you can be helpful for them. What do you worry about? What do you hope for? And this woman whose husband was just diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease said this: I hope for my partner to have a sense of self-worth, a sense of maintained meaning and purpose, and that I want he or she to be respected. Then I asked, that we were in different groups, then I went over and asked her husband what he hopes for. And he said, I want a reason to get up in the morning, and I want it to matter. Those are the sorts of hopes that we can help cultivate. So, dementia and worship. This is sometimes what I've heard when I've talked to faith communities or individuals about those who are living here or wanting to go to church or go to worship service. I hear this oftentimes from families. He or she doesn't really get anything out of it anymore, so why would I take her to church? Why would I take him to church? They'll just forget anyway. And I can understand the thinking behind that. But I'd like to get us thinking a little bit differently, and I think a little more accurately, about what persons with dementia can actually get out of attending a worship service. Think about the practice of worship. And by the way, and I don't mean any offense to those in the room who give the sermons, but sometimes we don't always get something out of a sermon, right? Aren't there just sermons that sometimes resonate with you, and other times you're kind of snoozing, or other times you're thinking about? That's the reality of it, right? So we don't want to somehow think that we're holier than thou. Not here, but in other places.